So, what if I told you that being a devout missionary, praying all the time, even performing miracles, might not actually be enough for salvation? Today, we're going to dig into a theological view that says the real standard is something totally different. We'll look at some biblical stories and a really simple analogy to figure out what that is. Okay, let's jump right in with a pretty fascinating figure from Christian history. His life story is, well, a bit of a paradox. We're talking about the founder of Methodism, John Wesley.
I mean, just take a look at this timeline. John Wesley's life was like a masterclass in religious devotion. He was raised in the church, got a theology degree from Oxford, became a missionary in America. He basically checked every single box you could think of. But, and this is the real shocker, Wesley himself wrote that even after doing all of that, he didn't feel truly saved until 1738. So how is that even possible?
Wesley summed up exactly how he felt with this really powerful line. He was working for God, for sure, but he felt like a servant, not a son. And for him, that huge difference was all about the assurance that his sins were actually forgiven. This starts to give us a clue, doesn't it? The idea of forgiveness as the key missing ingredient.
You know, this very personal story from a devout missionary feeling unsaved, it actually echoes a pretty stark warning that we find directly in the Bible, right in the book of Matthew.
So the Bible describes these people standing before Jesus on Judgment Day, and they basically present this incredible resume. And they're not listing small things, right? They're talking about supernatural works, prophesying, casting out demons, performing wonders, and they did it all in Jesus' name. They are 100% expecting a well done.
But the response they get is just devastating. It's not, oh, you didn't do quite enough. It's a total rejection. I never knew you. And then, unbelievably, Jesus calls all their miracles and prophecies lawlessness.
Okay, so this brings up a huge question. How in the world can doing amazing things in God's name be called lawless? I mean, that sounds like a complete contradiction.
Well, the Bible itself gives us the definition. 1 John just puts it out there, plain and simple. Sin is lawlessness. And the implication of that is pretty stunning. The problem isn't the action itself, it's the person doing it. So from this viewpoint, if that root problem of sin hasn't been dealt with in a person's heart, then even their most amazing, righteous-looking works are still fundamentally lawless.
And this idea gets reinforced by another powerful story from the book of Acts. This time, it's about a Roman centurion, a guy named Cornelius.
Now look at this guy's resume. Cornelius wasn't just, a good guy. He was a pillar of his community. Devout, super charitable, always praying, respected by everyone. He even had a direct vision from an angel. You seriously could not ask for a more stellar record. But, and here's the twist, the angel that showed up didn't say, hey, great job, Cornelius, you're in. No. Instead, the angel tells him to send for the apostle Peter, who would bring him a message that would lead to his salvation, which implies that despite everything on that list, he wasn't saved yet.
So this brings us right to the central puzzle, right? If being devout, praying, giving to charity, having a great reputation, and even getting messages from angels, if none of that is the standard for salvation, then what is? What was he missing?
The answer, according to this perspective, is found in the very specific message Peter delivered. It was the one thing Cornelius had done, everything except receive.
Peter's sermon to Cornelius was incredibly direct. It wasn't this long list of new rules or more things he had to do. Nope, it was a short 10-verse summary that just zeroed in on one absolutely crucial point. And there it is. That's the missing piece. This was the news that Cornelius, for all his good deeds, hadn't actually heard and received yet. The message was that salvation comes from one thing: receiving the remission of sins, total forgiveness, through faith in Jesus. And this little chart just lays out the argument perfectly. Look at the cause and effect. During all his years of praying and giving to charity and being a devout man, the biblical sign of salvation, the Holy Spirit, was nowhere to be seen. But the very moment he heard and accepted the message of forgiveness, boom, the Holy Spirit came. The trigger wasn't his works, it was the word of forgiveness.
Now, to make this theological concept really easy to get your head around, the source material gives us a simple, powerful analogy from modern life.
Just imagine the best driver you can possibly think of, right? They obey every speed limit, they always use their turn signals, they never even think about running a red light. But if they're driving without a license, none of that matters. Legally, the entire act of driving is lawless. The quality of what they're doing is completely irrelevant without the proper authorization.
Okay, so let's apply that. All those amazing religious acts, prophesying, giving to the poor, praying constantly, all of that is like the act of driving. But according to this perspective, the license that makes any of it valid in God's eyes is the forgiveness of sins.
And without that license, without that sin issue being officially resolved, all the good driving in the world is still considered lawless. And that brings us all the way back to that shocking judgment in the book of Matthew. It all starts to connect. So what's the big takeaway here? It's really a clear framing of a specific theological standard. It argues that salvation isn't some reward you get for good behavior, but it's more like a legal pardon for sin. It says the one non-negotiable thing you have to have is the forgiveness of sins, and everything else flows from there.
And that leaves us with a final, really provocative question that kind of gets to the heart of this whole thing. It's a challenge, really, to examine the foundation of your own faith. Is it resting on the things you do for God, or is it resting on the forgiveness you've received from God? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.